There's a particular kind of rewatching that happens very late at night. You're not really watching exactly. You're just sort of drifting alongside something familiar, letting the colors and the voices wash over you, and every now and then a detail snags your attention and you think, oh, I forgot about that, or whatever happened to them, and then you drift on. I've been doing that a lot recently with The Simpsons, old episodes mostly, seasons 3 through 8, which is roughly the period the show was operating at a level that still seems almost unfair when you go back to it. And one thing that keeps snagging my attention, and the detail that keeps pulling me out of the drift and back into genuine curiosity, is the one-time characters. The people who showed up for a single episode, did something extraordinary, and then just vanished back into the fabric of Springfield like they'd never been there at all. It's a specific kind of television magic, actually, and I don't think enough people talk about it. The Simpsons built one of the most populated fictional universes in television history. The show holds the Guinness World Record for the most guest stars featured in any television series, somewhere around 810 unique guest appearances as of a few years ago. And that's just the celebrity guests, not even counting the hundreds of recurring Springfield residents who exist in the background of every street scene. But within all of that enormous cast, there's a smaller group that I keep coming back to. Characters who showed up for exactly one episode, who were sometimes voiced by genuinely famous people, who sometimes anchored the show's greatest hours, and who then stepped off screen and were never properly explained again. What happened to them? That's the question that keeps me up in the nicest possible way. Some of them got brief mentions in later seasons, a tombstone in Springfield Cemetery, an answering machine joke 20 years down the line. Some of them were retired from the show for reasons that have nothing to do with the story. Real-world complications, voice actor situations, the simple economics of television. And some of them just ended. Their episode concluded, the credits rolled, and the show moved on without ever looking back. I should say up front that I'm using the phrase one-time character fairly loosely tonight. Some of the people we're going to talk about technically appeared in a brief background shot in a later episode, or had their name mentioned in passing, or had a joke made at their expense from off-screen. I'm not counting those as real returns. If the character's story, the actual narrative arc of who they were and what they did, concluded in a single episode, they're eligible for tonight. That's the working definition. The other thing worth saying, I've tried to include characters who represent different things about what the show was doing in different periods. There are obvious choices here. Everyone who's ever made a list of the show's best episodes knows a few of these names. And there are slightly more obscure ones. I've tried to balance them, though I'd be lying if I said I resisted the gravitational pull of the obvious ones entirely. Some of the obvious choices are obvious for good reason. A number of the best one-time characters were voiced by people who were at or near the peak of their cultural prominence at the time. Dustin Hoffman, Meryl Streep, Albert Brooks, Johnny Cash, Danny DeVito, Phil Hartman. The show attracted that level of talent because of what it was in the early and mid-90s, and those performances, delivered in a recording booth in Los Angeles for a cartoon under various pseudonyms, are now the thing many people know those actors from in terms of specific memorable moments, which is its own kind of strange achievement for a show that was often described in that era as trashy. It wasn't trashy, it just pretended to be sometimes, so you wouldn't notice how serious it was being about everything else. The one-time characters exist in a state of permanent first impression. We only ever know them at their most essential, the version of themselves the episode needed them to be. And there's no subsequent seasons of characterization to complicate or diminish that. Hank Scorpio is always the best boss Homer ever had because he never came back to become something more complicated. Mr. Bergstrom is always the teacher who got it right because he never had a second episode where he was tired or distracted or wrong about something. They're preserved at the exact moment they were most themselves. Tonight, I want to go through them one by one. I'm not going to rush any of it. We'll spend some time with each character, what they were about, what made them work, what the episode said about Springfield and the people in it, and where they ended up, in the story, and sometimes behind the scenes. Some of these you'll know immediately. Some might take a moment to place. A few are genuinely obscure, the kind of thing you'd only remember if you'd seen the episode recently or had the particular kind of brain that files away background details from television programs watched in childhood. I have that brain. I suspect you might too if you're here. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We do a lot of Simpsons content here, mostly the longer, more analytical stuff. But every now and then we do something gentler. This is one of those. No theories tonight, no forensic evidence accumulation, just the characters and their stories, told at whatever pace feels right. Tonight I want to go through them one by one. I'm not going to rush any of it. We'll spend some time with each character, what they were about, what made them work, what the episode said about Springfield and the people in it, and where they ended up in the story and sometimes behind the scenes. Some of these you'll know immediately. Some might take a moment to place. A few are genuinely obscure, the kind of thing you'd only remember if you'd seen the episode recently or had the particular kind of brain that files away background details from television programs watched in childhood. Something I keep coming back to, going through them. So many of the best one-episode characters arrived during what's generally called the show's golden era, roughly seasons 3 through 8, give or take. This was the period when the writing room was full of people who'd go on to some of the most significant careers in American comedy, when the show was generating ideas faster than it could use them, when an episode could pivot from broad cartoon slapstick to genuine emotional precision within the same 22 minutes, and make neither register feel out of place. The one-time characters from this period have a particular quality of completeness to them. They're fully realized in ways that characters from later seasons sometimes aren't, because the writers were at a creative peak and had something to prove. Each of them feels like the product of a room that cared about every line, and you can feel that in how they hold up. Part of what made those characters work, I think, was the discipline the show had in that period about not overstaying a welcome. The golden era was full of episodes that introduced enormous premises, a Bond villain boss, a con man with a show tune, a man who claimed to be Michael Jackson, and then resolved them in 22 minutes and moved on. The show didn't bring Hank Scorpio back. It didn't do a follow-up episode with Lyle Lanley in North Haverbrook. It introduced the character, gave them everything they needed, and trusted the audience to carry the rest. That confidence, the willingness to use something fully and then let it go, is part of what made those characters feel so complete. They weren't left open because there was more story to tell. They were closed because the story had been told. So, let's start at what I'd consider the obvious starting point, which is also one of the greatest episodes the show ever made. The 8th season of The Simpsons, which aired in 1996 and 1997, is something of an embarrassment of riches. It gave us Homer's Enemy and You Only Move Twice, and the Prohibition episode, and the X-Files crossover, and the one where Homer navigates a chili-induced spiritual journey, all in the same run of television. It's the kind of season that makes you feel slightly sad about everything else, because the bar it set was so extraordinarily high. You Only Move Twice, Season 8, Episode 2, aired on the 3rd of November 1996, is often cited as the greatest individual episode the show ever produced. I'm not sure I'd argue with that, and I've spent a reasonable amount of time thinking about it. The episode does something that sounds absurd on paper and then executes it with such complete confidence that it never feels absurd for even a moment. It gives Homer the best job he has ever had with the most attentive and genuinely supportive boss he has ever worked for, and then reveals as a sort of background detail that the boss is a Bond villain attempting to seize the East Coast. His name is Hank Scorpio. He's voiced by Albert Brooks, who is, in my view, one of the great guest performances in the history of the show, possibly the great guest performance. And he operates with this specific energy that I find genuinely difficult to describe. He's warm. That's the word that keeps coming back to me. He is genuinely, authentically warm, and the warmth isn't a manipulation or a front. He just happens to also be planning world domination. The two things coexist in him without apparent tension. The episode opens with Homer being recruited by a Globex Corporation representative and agreeing to move the entire family to a company town called Cypress Creek. The show does something smart here. It never frames Cypress Creek as sinister. The town is actually beautiful. The house is wonderful. The job is perfectly suited to Homer's particular capabilities, which is to say it requires almost nothing of him, and he thrives. Hank Scorpio uses first names. He asks Homer about his dreams. He literally runs alongside Homer during a foot race and offers him a hammock because the issue, he says, is that hammock time is not being built into the schedule. The show is doing something quite precise here, actually. Homer has spent 7 seasons being ignored, condescended to, and nearly killed by his workplace. And now here's this man, intelligent, funny, unbelievably competent, who treats Homer like a colleague worth knowing, who asks where he sees himself in 5 years, who, in the middle of a genuine government assault on his headquarters, takes time out to listen to Homer explain his family situation and tell him sincerely, do what's best for your family. Most Simpsons episodes about Homer at work make the workplace the source of suffering. The plant is dangerous, Burns is terrible, the commute is grim. Cypress Creek is the opposite. The episode genuinely invites you to want what Homer wants. It's not playing a joke on him. The house has a self-cleaning oven and windows that tint automatically and a garden that doesn't need maintaining. The job gives Homer a sense of purpose and an actual relationship with his boss. Hank Scorpio asks Homer about his goals and then makes actual practical adjustments to help Homer achieve them, which no one at the Springfield nuclear power plant has ever done. Homer's comment at one point in that he's never been happier is played completely straight. He means it. The counterpoint is the family who are not thriving. Marge finds the perfect house stifling. It cleans itself, the garden waters itself, there's nothing for her to do, and the emptiness makes her anxious. Bart gets placed in a remedial class at his new school because he can't read cursive or do fractions. Lisa discovers she's allergic to the local flora. They want to go home. And Homer, for the first time in the show's run, is genuinely conflicted about it because this job is the first time work has ever felt like something other than a sentence. He tells Scorpio he has to leave. Scorpio says, "Go, be with your family." He means it. At the end of the episode, with the Simpsons back in Springfield, a package arrives. It's from Hank. It includes a note. He sees the East Coast, things are going well, and a gift. Homer wanted the Dallas Cowboys. He got the Denver Broncos. No notes. Genuinely no notes. Albert Brooks improvised a significant portion of his dialogue. The writers reportedly let the tape run long and kept using what he gave them, which is a thing that happens when you cast Albert Brooks and then sensibly get out of his way. There's a casualness to Scorpio that you can't write exactly. You can only find it in the room and preserve it. The line about the hammock, the way he says, "Look behind you," when Homer starts explaining something. The specific warmth of his goodbye. Those feel like a person rather than a character, and that's almost entirely Brooks. And that's why the ending lands so quietly. Homer chose his family over all of that, and it was the right choice, and the show doesn't make it feel like a punishment. It's just the way things are. The version of Homer's life in which he works for Hank Scorpio is a better version in many measurable ways, and it wasn't available to him because the family needed Springfield, not Cypress Creek. And so he came home. Season 8 aired at a period when the show was doing something quite deliberate with Homer's character, finding ways to let him be genuinely good at something, to give him episodes where his life worked out, to allow the audience to feel the gap between what he has and what he might have had. You Only Move Twice sits alongside Homer's Enemy in that season as a pair of episodes asking the same question from different angles. What does Homer deserve? The Scorpio episode's answer is warm. The Grimes episode's answer, as we'll see, is not. Brooks returned to The Simpsons once more to voice a different character entirely. He played Russ Cargill, the EPA administrator villain in the Simpsons movie in 2007. A different character, a different kind of antagonist, a different register, But Scorpio is the one that lasts. Scorpio is the one where Brooks found something the show hadn't found before and wouldn't quite find again in the same way. Scorpio never appears again in the show's run. He's mentioned once or twice in passing. In a much later episode, there's a brief nod to him having continued his world domination efforts. But he doesn't come back. He's out there somewhere with the East Coast and the Denver Broncos and a hammock schedule, being the best boss anyone in Springfield never got to keep. One more thing about the Scorpio-Goodman comparison that's worth making explicit. Brooks plays Warmth differently in the two roles because Warmth is doing a different job in each. With Scorpio, the Warmth is the character. It's what Scorpio actually is, even in the middle of seizing the East Coast, even running a supervillain operation. The world domination is almost incidental to who he is. With Goodman, the Warmth is the technique. It's what Goodman deploys to open people up before he takes what he wants. The two performances are technically similar. The voice is recognizable, the timing is the same. But the emotional content is completely different, and Brooks makes the distinction feel natural and effortless. That's a rare thing. I think about this episode more than is probably reasonable. Now, let's talk about a con man. Specifically the con man from Marge vs. the Monorail, which is Season 4, Episode 12, aired in January 1993, and was written by Conan O'Brien before he left the show to go and do late-night television. It's one of the best written half hours in the show's history, which is a considerable claim given what the show was producing in that period, and it centers almost entirely on a character who appears for one episode and then never comes back. His name is Lyle Lanley. He's voiced by Phil Hartman, who we'll come back to more than once tonight because Hartman's shadow falls across several of these characters in ways that matter. And he arrives in Springfield with a briefcase full of charts and an answer for absolutely everything. The setup of the episode is that Springfield receives a windfall, $3 million in fines paid by Mr. Burns for dumping radioactive waste, and the town has to decide what to do with it. Marge wants to use it to repair the clearly deteriorating Main Street. This is the sensible option. It is rejected almost immediately. Because Lyle Lanley walks in, he delivers a song, a whole song, choreographed, with the kind of enthusiasm that bypasses your rational brain entirely. The Monorail song is a genuine piece of work. You could argue it's the best original song in the show's history, and I'd put up a reasonable argument for it. It's directly modeled on the opening number from The Music Man, which is a show about a con man who sells a town on a boys band they don't need. And the parallel is intentional. Lanley is Harold Hill. He has an answer for everything and a counter for every concern. And by the time the song is finished, the crowd is cheering, and Marge is the only person in the room with reservations. She keeps having reservations throughout the episode, which is part of what makes it work. The show doesn't make Marge a nag or a killjoy. It makes her the one person paying attention, which is its own kind of loneliness. The Monorail song is worth a slightly closer look, actually, because it's doing several things simultaneously and making all of them look effortless. The references to Brockway, Ogdenville, and North Haverbrook aren't just names, they're the evidence that Lanley has done this before, right there in the song, if anyone was paying attention. He's not hiding it. He's performing it in plain sight and trusting that no one will notice because the song is too enjoyable to analyze. That's the actual con, not the content of the pitch, but the form of it. You can't think critically about information delivered as a show tune. The medium disables the faculty you need to apply to it. Homer, watching the song, is not experiencing a sales pitch. He's experiencing theater, and theater operates on a different set of rules. The episode has a scene where Marge visits North Haverbrook and finds a town in ruin. The monorail went wrong, things were badly built, people were hurt, a woman lost her leg. The town is impoverished and bitter, and the monorail sits abandoned in the station, a monument to having been credulous at the wrong moment. Marge comes back to Springfield having seen what's coming. Nobody listens. That's the other thing the episode is about, underneath the comedy. The gap between having information and being able to deploy it against enthusiasm. Marge had the evidence. The town had already voted. You can't unperform a show tune with a PowerPoint. The monorail, naturally, is a disaster. It's built badly, it runs on no visible infrastructure, and when it launches with Homer at the helm, it almost immediately goes wrong in several expensive ways. Homer saves the day through a combination of luck and a large M that acts as a brake, which is the kind of plot resolution that only makes sense in a cartoon and completely works. Lanley, meanwhile, is on a plane. He has a suitcase full of money. He's laughing to himself, the way people do in films when they've just got away with something enormous. He's genuinely delighted. Then the pilot announces they're landing in North Haverbrook. North Haverbrook is one of the towns Lanley mentioned in his song, one of the places he'd already sold a monorail to. And the camera cut to his face in that moment, the smile dying, the recognition arriving, is one of the most satisfying single images in the show's run. He told us in the song he sold monorails to Brockway, Ogdenville, and North Haverbrook, and by gum, it put them on the map. He just didn't mention what the map looked like. What happened to Lanley in North Haverbrook is never shown. The episode ends and that's it. Given the state of the people in North Haverbrook, Marge visits earlier and finds a ruined town, a woman who lost her leg, a general atmosphere of grievance. I think we can fill in the rest. Phil Hartman's performance is worth a specific mention here. There's something Hartman did with certain characters. A warmth that made them feel trustworthy, even when the writing was telling you not to trust them. And Lanley is a perfect example. You understand why Springfield fell for it. The voice is so reasonable, so delighted, so apparently on their side. That gap between voice and reality is the whole joke, and Hartman held it perfectly. Lanley never came back. Hartman died in 1998, which meant his characters, not just Lanley but Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz, were retired from the show. They appear occasionally in background crowd scenes but never speak, and no one has been recast in those roles. There's a kind of respect in that, I think. Conan O'Brien wrote this episode during his time as a staff writer on the show, which ran from season 3 to season 4 before he left for late night. He's spoken about it since as the thing he's most proud of from that period, which is understandable. It's a complete piece of work. The con man, the song, the town that deserved better, the plane landing in the wrong place, everything in the right order. It's also, in retrospect, a very concentrated piece of writing from someone who understood the show deeply and was working at the absolute peak of what the show could do. The Music Man reference is not accidental. It's a signal to the audience that they're watching something that knows what con man stories are about and is about to do its version correctly. The episode has that quality of someone who loves the form they're working in and has thought carefully about what the form requires. Lanley works because the episode earns him, from the first chart to the last smile on the plane. Nothing is wasted. Lanley's last moment, the smile dying as the plane descends to North Haverbrook, is among the show's most satisfying single images. A perfect end for a perfect con man. Homer's Enemy is Season 8, Episode 23. Aired on the 4th of May, 1997. It has an IMDb rating of 9.3 out of 10, which makes it the highest rated episode the show has ever produced. It was written by John Swartzwelder, who over the course of his career wrote 59 Simpsons episodes, more than anyone else ever. And it is the most uncomfortable the show ever made itself on purpose for a reason. The premise is deceptively simple. The power plant hires a new employee. His name is Frank Grimes, though he preferred Grimy as he liked to be called. He is a normal person. He works hard. He has done everything right in a life that has been difficult from the very beginning. He was abandoned by his parents. He taught himself. He got a degree through night school. He worked 2 jobs simultaneously. He survived a silo explosion that left him with none of his original skin. He is exactly the kind of person who, in any fair reading of the universe, should be rewarded. He gets placed in Sector 7G next to Homer Simpson. The episode opens with a local news segment about Frank Grimes. It's presented as a human interest piece, the kind of thing local news does with people who have overcome hardship. And it's narrated in the register of inspirational television. Grimes was abandoned. Grimes worked hard. Grimes survived an explosion. Grimes got his degree. And now Grimes is starting a new job at the Springfield nuclear power plant, and things are finally going his way. Mr. Burns sees the news segment and, moved by it, orders Smithers to hire Grimes as executive vice president. Then Burns forgets he did this and gives the executive vice president role to a particularly courageous dog instead, and assigns Grimes to a low-level position in Sector 7G. This is the first indication that the universe Grimes has entered is not one that operates on merit. The episode is essentially asking a question: what happens if you put a real person in Homer's world? Not a cartoon character, not someone adapted to the particular physics of Springfield, but an actual human being who operates on merit and consequence. And the answer is that it destroys him. Not slowly, not dramatically, just steadily, episode by episode. Except there's only one episode, which is almost the point. The specific indignities are worth going through because the episode is careful about them. Homer's office has a plaque from President Ford. He has a photo of himself as an astronaut. He has a Grammy Award on the wall. Homer didn't earn any of these through the normal mechanisms of effort and talent. He stumbled into them through the specific chaos of his life, the way he stumbles into everything. To Frank Grimes, looking at this wall from across the room, it is a document of cosmic injustice. Grimes declares himself Homer's enemy. Formally, he announces it. Homer doesn't understand why. That's the cruelest part, actually. Homer isn't malicious toward Grimes. He doesn't know he's doing anything wrong. He tries, in his way, to be friendly. He invites Grimes to dinner. The dinner is a disaster. Homer's house is enormous, full of evidence of a life Homer didn't deserve by any standard Grimes would recognize. And Grimes leaves more undone than when he arrived. Grimes tries several times to expose Homer's incompetence to Burns. He designs an experiment to prove Homer can't do his job. Homer wins a children's nuclear design competition by entering it as an adult and drawing a basic cartoon design, and Burns congratulates him publicly while Grimes stands in the background. There's a scene where Grimes rearranges things on Homer's desk to make it look like Homer's about to touch exposed live wires, intending to warn him and expose his recklessness. And Homer does something that accidentally prevents the incident and gets praised for safety awareness. The universe catches every attempt, not through malice, but through the specific immune response of a world calibrated for someone else. The end of the episode is Grimes, fully unraveled, walking through the power plant, mimicking Homer's incompetence, grabbing exposed electrical wires without safety gloves because Homer would do it and nothing would happen to Homer. The logic is impeccable, given what he's observed. He dies immediately. At the funeral, Homer falls asleep and calls out, "Change the channel, Marge." The crowd laughs. Swartzwelder has said in interviews, which are rare because he stopped doing them decades ago, that the episode was the show examining itself. What it means that Homer's life works out, what it would mean for someone watching from outside. The conclusion the episode reaches is not a comfortable one. The universe in Springfield is calibrated specifically for Homer, and anyone operating on different assumptions will be destroyed by the differential. Swartzwelder has a particular gift for a kind of comedy that operates at the edge of horror. Scenes that are funny and deeply uncomfortable simultaneously, where the laugh and the wince arrive at exactly the same moment. Homer's enemy is his clearest example of this. The funeral scene, Homer asleep, calling out to Marge, the crowd laughing, is the episode's thesis delivered as a punchline. Grimes was right about everything. The universe doesn't care. The crowd laughs. Frank Grimes' son appeared once in a later episode, Season 14's The Great Louse Detective, trying to avenge his father by killing Homer. He fails, also through a kind of cosmic indifference. It's a brief thing, not the main story, but it's there. The show acknowledged that Grimes left something behind. A son who grew up knowing exactly what happened, who grew up with the injustice as a fact of his childhood. The son's failure to avenge Grimes is played as dark comedy, and it is dark comedy. But there's also something quietly devastating in it. The universe didn't just destroy Frank Grimes once, it's still refusing to correct itself. The son tried, and the same forces that killed his father simply redirected the consequences somewhere else. And Grimes himself, his grave is in Springfield Cemetery and has appeared in background shots across multiple later seasons. The show didn't forget him, it just kept him dead and kept moving. There's a particular quality to this episode that I find harder to describe than the Scorpio one, even though the Scorpio one is probably the better hour of television. Homer's enemy is the show in a genuinely uncomfortable relationship with itself, acknowledging what it is, what the rules of its world mean, and then not softening that acknowledgement. The conclusion isn't that Homer should change. The conclusion is that Grimes was right about everything and it made no difference. Swartzwelder wrote 59 episodes over the course of his career, more than anyone else in the show's history. He left the writer's room at some point in the early 2000s and has since given essentially no interviews. He lives, by most accounts, on a boat somewhere in Montana, which is geographically improbable and sounds about right for someone who wrote the most unsettling half hour in the show's history, and then quietly stepped away from all of it. His work is the infrastructure of the golden era, in a way that's hard to overstate. He was the one writing the episodes that made other writers think, oh, that's what this show can do. Homer's Enemy is the episode where Swartzwelder looked at the universe of the show he'd helped create and said, here's what it means. Here's the actual logic underneath the jokes. And then he put Frank Grimes in that universe and then let the logic destroy him. That's a strange thing to put in a comedy about a cartoon family. And somehow it works. Lisa's Substitute is Season 2, Episode 19, aired on the 25th of April, 1991. The show was still finding itself at that point. The animation was rougher, the rhythm slightly different, the tone occasionally uncertain between the hard gag comedy of the first season and the more emotionally grounded thing it was becoming. But this episode arrived already fully formed, and it's still one of the most affecting things the show ever did. Miss Hoover, Lisa's teacher, takes a leave of absence. Her substitute is a Mr. Bergstrom, voiced by Dustin Hoffman under the pseudonym Sam Edick. The pseudonym is worth pausing on. Hoffman apparently requested it because he didn't want the episode to function as a publicity exercise. He wasn't interested in the announcement that Dustin Hoffman was doing The Simpsons. He just wanted to do it, quietly, because he genuinely loved what they were building. You can feel that in the performance. Mr. Bergstrom is warm in a very specific way. Not the performed warmth of someone trying to win over students, but the warmth of someone who is actually interested in ideas and genuinely delighted by Lisa's mind. He teaches the class about the Old West through costume and storytelling. He tells Lisa that her father isn't worthless, he's just different. He answers her questions fully, as though the answers matter, as though she matters. This is not the experience Lisa generally has. The episode has a B-plot involving Bart running for class president, which gives the episode its comedy engine and also quietly its second emotional thread. Bart wins the election. Martin is the better candidate by every rational measure, but Bart has charisma and Martin doesn't, and the class votes accordingly. And then discovers that having won, he can't remember why he wanted it. He ran because winning felt like the right thing to want. He didn't think about what came after. Both Bart and Lisa, in their separate ways, are discovering something about the difference between wanting something for real reasons and wanting something because it's available and you're supposed to want it. Bart wanted the presidency and got it, and it was hollow. Lisa wanted a teacher who saw her and got one and then lost him. One of those experiences is more devastating, and the episode knows which one. There's also a C-plot involving Homer being emotionally useless during Lisa's crisis. which is not played for laughs so much as for quiet truth. Homer can't give Lisa what she needs from this. He doesn't have the vocabulary for it, and so when Mr. Bergstrom has to leave, the episode ends, it hits Lisa harder than it probably should because he was filling a gap she'd been pretending wasn't there. She runs to the train station to say goodbye. She asks him for something to hold on to when things are hard. He writes a note on a piece of paper and hands it to her. She doesn't open it until she's crying on the walk home. 3 words, "You are Lisa Simpson." That's the whole episode. The whole point of it, really. Someone saw her clearly enough to write her name and mean it as a comfort. She needed that from her father. She got it from a substitute teacher she'd known for a week. And then he was gone. The specific decision to make the note 3 words, Hoffman's improvisation during recording against a longer written version, is one of those moments where you can see exactly how good instinct works. The longer version would have explained something. The shorter version trusts Lisa to do the explaining to herself. It trusts the audience to do the same. It says, "You know what this means. You don't need me to spell it out." And the specific choice of "you are Lisa Simpson" rather than something more effusive, something about her intelligence, her kindness, her future, gives her her own name as the comfort. Not who she should be, who she is, that's what she needed. Hoffman's note is that he improvised the content of the note during recording. The writers had written something different, longer, more explanatory. Hoffman suggested that less was more, that the power of the moment was in its smallness. He was right, as it turned out. Mr. Bergstrom technically reappeared in a brief background scene in a much later season, but without consequence. It was more of an Easter egg for long-term viewers than a genuine continuation of his story. His story ended at the train station. That's where it needed to end. The second season of The Simpsons is when the show figured out it could be genuinely moving without losing its comedy, that the 2 registers weren't in conflict. This episode is arguably the proof of concept, and the character at the center of it is a substitute teacher who appeared once, said all the right things, and got on a train. The season as a whole was doing something important. It was establishing that the show could go places most animated comedies wouldn't. It could be genuinely sad about real things, about loneliness, about the limits of parenting, about the gap between what children need and what adults can provide. Season 2 gave us Homer's enemies' emotional inverse in some ways. Not the tragedy of someone destroyed by the show's universe, but the smaller, quieter tragedy of someone the universe couldn't keep. Mr. Bergstrom was too good for Springfield in the sense that he was genuinely good, unambiguously, in a world that doesn't tend to reward that. He came, he saw, he gave Lisa what she needed, and he left. The show didn't make a drama of his departure, it just let him go. There's something quietly lovely about the fact that Hoffman wanted to do it without the announcement, that he just wanted to give Lisa her note and leave. It suits the character perfectly. Bergstrom's note is one of those things. I remember the first time I watched that episode and reached the moment where Lisa opens the paper on the walk home. You can see the episode build into it. You know something is coming, and then it arrives and it's 3 words, and somehow it's everything. I don't remember being particularly young when I first saw it. I remember that it still worked. It still does. Simpson and Delilah is Season 2, Episode 2, which aired in October 1990. It's a relatively early episode, still in the period when the show was establishing who Homer was and what his life actually contained. And it does something remarkable for 1990 network television, which it does entirely without drawing attention to itself. The setup is that Homer uses a company health insurance loophole to purchase Dimoxenil, a miracle hair growth product, and overnight grows back a full head of hair. The hair makes him look different enough that he gets promoted to an executive position. The company assigns him a secretary. The secretary's name is Carl. Carl is voiced by Harvey Fierstein, and I want to spend a moment on the casting before I talk about the character because it matters. Fierstein is openly gay. He has been for his entire career. His voice is distinctive, low, raspy, immediately recognizable. The show cast him as a character who believes in Homer completely and sacrifices significantly to protect him, and then, in the final scene, kisses him on the lips goodbye. In 1990, on Fox, on a primetime animated comedy watched by millions of people. The show didn't announce this, there was no press release. It just happened as a matter of course, as part of who Carl was. Harvey Fierstein, who has spoken publicly about the episode over the years, has described Carl as one of the most meaningful roles of his career, not because it was dramatic or difficult, but because of the normalcy of it. Because the show treated Carl as a person first and let everything else be incidental. That phrasing, person first, is worth dwelling on. The show didn't cast a gay actor to play a gay character in order to make a statement about gay characters. It cast Harvey Fierstein to play Carl because Carl needed a specific voice and Fierstein had it, and Carl happened to be gay the way people happen to be things, which is to say it was just part of who he was and not the whole of what the episode was about. The show's handling of Carl is notable for what it doesn't do as much as for what it does. It doesn't make Carl's homosexuality a plot point. It's not discussed. No one comments on it. No one reacts to it as though it's a problem or a revelation. The episode doesn't build toward the kiss as though it's a confrontation or a statement. Carl kisses Homer goodbye. Homer doesn't process it as anything out of the ordinary, and the scene continues. By 1990 standards, on a major network for a primetime comedy watched by tens of millions of people, that matter-of-factness was itself a choice, a significant one. What makes Carl extraordinary as a character isn't the kiss, actually, it's the unconditional belief. Carl watches Homer stumble through his new executive role and sees not what everyone else sees, a buffoon given a title he doesn't deserve, but genuine potential, obscured by a lifetime of being told he's less than he is. He handles Homer's correspondence with skill. He prepares him for meetings. He tells Homer, before a crucial presentation, that he's wonderful, and the scene plays it entirely straight. At some point during the episode, Homer's secret gets out. Someone discovers the hair growth treatment and brings it to management, and Carl is confronted with a choice. He can tell the truth and protect himself, or he can take the fall and lose his job to protect Homer's. He takes the fall, no hesitation. No extraction of promises from Homer, he just does it. Then he says goodbye. The kiss is brief and matter-of-fact, like of course, and then he's gone. Homer loses the hair and the job eventually anyway. The treatment wears off, he's demoted, things return to normal. But Carl did what he came to do. He gave Homer a period of being seen as capable, and he seems to have found that worthwhile in itself. There's something almost superhero-ish about Carl, actually, if you squint at it. He arrives at a moment of need, he provides what's needed, he pays the cost without complaint, he leaves. The episode is structured almost like a superhero origin story, except the hero isn't Homer. Homer is the beneficiary. Carl is the hero. He just doesn't have a cape or the job anymore. I find Carl genuinely moving in a way that's disproportionate to how much screen time he gets. He's in maybe 10 minutes of television, but there's something about the specificity of the character, the complete lack of ulterior motive, the care that asks nothing back, that sticks. He never returns. He doesn't send a card. He doesn't make an appearance in a later season to see how Homer's doing. He just exits and the episode moves on. And Carl ceases to exist in the show's universe as cleanly as if he'd never arrived. The episode's quiet argument is that being seen is one of the most important things one person can give another, and that most of us go through most of our lives without it. Carl saw Homer clearly and completely and acted on what he saw with total generosity. There's a fantasy in that which doesn't depend on the specifics of the situation, which is maybe why the episode sticks. It's not a fantasy about success or recognition from the world at large. It's a fantasy about one person looking at you and seeing what's actually there. Carl is the kind of person most of us aspire to be, done as a background character in an early episode of a cartoon and then quietly filed away. Colonel Homer is Season 3, Episode 20, aired in March 1992, and it's one of those episodes where the premise sounds slightly alarming in summary and turns out to be handled with considerably more care than you'd expect. Homer discovers Lurleen Lumpkin at a Roadhouse dive bar. She's a country singer. She's genuinely good. He becomes her manager. She falls in love with him. Marge is aware of all of this and handles it with a composure that would have broken most television marriages of the era. Lurleen is voiced by Beverly D'Angelo, who also performed the songs written for the episode, and those songs are worth a specific mention because they're actually good. Not parody good, not technically accomplished for a cartoon good, but genuinely enjoyable country songs that hold up when you listen to them without the episode around them. The show commissioned original country music for the episode and took it seriously as music, not as parody. The writers and D'Angelo worked to make songs that would function both as comedy and as genuine country, which is a harder needle to thread than it sounds. Country has specific structures and emotional registers, and the Lurleen songs inhabit those structures honestly. They're funny because of the context and the content, not because they're doing a bad impression of the genre. That care is part of why the character works as well as she does. If the songs were generic parody, Lurleen would just be a joke. Because the songs are real, she becomes real. You can believe in this woman. You can hear what she hears when she sings about Homer, which is not exactly Homer, but the idea of Homer, the shape of a man who came and paid attention to her when no one else did. The emotional dynamic in Colonel Homer is interesting because the show doesn't make Homer oblivious in the usual way. He knows Lurleen has feelings for him. He's just genuinely, fundamentally committed to Marge in a way that doesn't require active decision-making. He's not resisting temptation so much as not experiencing it in the form Lurleen is offering. The episode ends with Homer selling Lurleen's management contract to a major label because Marge asks him to, framed as a grand romantic gesture. He's choosing her over the professional relationship. And it sort of is a romantic gesture. Except that selling Lurleen's contract to people who will handle her badly is also not entirely unambiguous. The show acknowledges this in a small way without making it the point. Lurleen returned in Season 14 in an episode where Springfield is collecting unpaid taxes and Lurleen turns out to be a significant debtor. She's living rough by this point, multiple ex-husbands, all of whom strongly resemble Homer, no money because it all went to the marriages. She ends up briefly staying with the Simpsons, which makes Marge understandably tense. The resolution of that episode involves Lurleen reconnecting with her estranged father, who promptly steals a song she writes about him and sells it to the Dixie Chicks. So it goes. But she ends the episode with a new boyfriend who also looks like Homer, and a kind of resilience that suits her. Marge's farewell to her contains a threat, delivered with a smile, about hair extensions. D'Angelo came back for the Season 14 episode and performed those songs too, which means there are two separate chapters of Lurleen's musical output, separated by about a decade of showtime. The character aged in certain ways between those appearances, more worn, more knowing, more clearly shaped by the consequences of her choices. And D'Angelo's performance tracks that. There's a circularity to Lurleen's story that the show seems to understand as a feature rather than a bug. Some patterns don't break. Some people keep reaching for the same shape of thing. Lurleen keeps finding Homer-shaped people to love, and maybe that's a tragedy, or maybe it's just who she is, and the show lets you decide. Lurleen is still out there somewhere, presumably, with the Homer-adjacent boyfriend and the new contract with the Dixie Chicks, having what passes for a life after everything. There's a specific thing worth saying about Beverly D'Angelo's contribution to this character that goes beyond the acting. The songs she performed for the episode have a specific kind of sincerity. They're written to be funny, yes, but the performances are committed to the emotional reality of the character. When Lurleen sings about Homer, the comedy comes from the subject and the directness of the lyrics, not from any winking at the audience. D'Angelo played it like she believed every word. That choice makes the character's arc land properly. If the songs felt like a joke being made at Lurleen's expense, she'd be a punchline. Because they feel like songs she actually means, she's a person. That distinction between a character the show is laughing with and a character the show is laughing at is one the writers navigated carefully throughout the golden era, and it's most visible in the characters who could easily have been treated as pure jokes. Lurleen could have been just a gag about country music stereotypes. The songs and D'Angelo's performance make her something more complicated than that. Stark Raving Dad is Season 3, Episode 1, which aired on the 19th of September, 1991. It was, for a long time, one of the most famous and most fondly remembered episodes in the show's run. It was the Season 3 premiere. It was enormous. And since 2019, it has been completely removed from all official distribution. Every platform, every channel, every streaming service. And it's the only Simpsons episode for which that's true. I want to talk about the episode and the character before I talk about why it was pulled, because the character deserves that. Homer is sent to a mental institution after wearing a pink shirt to work, which gets him flagged as an oddity at the plant. At the institution, he meets his roommate, a large white man named Leon Kompowski, who speaks entirely convincingly in the voice of Michael Jackson. Leon says he's Michael Jackson. He believes this. He says it with complete sincerity and the specific gentleness of someone who is used to not being believed. Michael Jackson voiced the character under the pseudonym John J. Smith. He apparently requested the pseudonym for the same reason Hoffman had. He wanted to do it as a personal project, quietly, without the machinery of a press announcement. The decision to credit the role as John J. Smith apparently came from Jackson himself, and the writers honored it completely, telling no one during the episode's production run who was actually voicing Leon. The pseudonym only became widely known because people recognized the voice. The show didn't confirm it during the original broadcast, didn't announce it in press materials, it just aired. This is, in its way, consistent with the character. The whole episode is about a man who says he's Michael Jackson and can't be verified. The show extended that ambiguity to the real world in a small, careful way. When the episode aired, the voice was immediately recognizable to anyone who'd ever heard Michael Jackson speak. The character talks about creativity and kindness and the importance of genuine connection. He helps Bart write a birthday song for Lisa, the singing portions of which were performed by Kip Lennon because the deal with Jackson apparently didn't extend to the musical performance. The birthday song itself is a genuinely sweet thing. It's not satirical. It's not a joke at Lisa's expense or Bart's expense. It's Bart doing something kind for his sister because a person he met in a psychiatric facility encouraged him to. And the show treats that at face value. The reveal at the end of the episode, Leon isn't Michael Jackson. He never was. He walks away from Homer speaking in his natural voice. Different, ordinary, not the voice of a pop star. And the implication is that the Michael Jackson identity was a delusion or a performance, or something the show deliberately left ambiguous. He's just a man who checked himself out and moved on. There's a specific quality to Jackson's voice in the episode, beyond the obvious recognizability, that suits Leon particularly well. It's patient. It has the quality of someone who is very used to not being believed and has made peace with that. Leon never argues his case aggressively, he just states it with warmth and lets it sit. The episode was pulled from all official channels in 2019 in the wake of a documentary about Michael Jackson's alleged behavior toward children. The decision was made by the showrunners and the studio, and it's been maintained consistently since. Disney Plus will not stream it. The 24/7 Simpsons channel that Disney runs specifically won't include it. It exists in people's personal collections and on various corners of the internet. But officially, it's gone. I think about this with a certain amount of sadness, actually, because the episode itself, taken purely as what it is is warm and kind and genuinely well crafted. Leon Kompowski is a gentle character. His function in the story is to encourage connection and to help a boy do something nice for his sister. That's all. And the season 3 premiere context matters here. This was the episode that opened the season that would produce Marge versus the monorail and Lisa's substitute and Homer at the bat. The show was in an extraordinary run of form, and it chose to open it with an episode about a man in a psychiatric institution who believed he was Michael Jackson and wanted Bart to do something kind. That choice, the decision to start with gentleness rather than spectacle, says something about what the writers thought the show was for. It wasn't primarily for jokes, though the jokes were excellent. It was for moments like Leon handing Bart a piece of paper and saying, "Do something nice for your sister. Try. It matters." The complication exists entirely outside the episode's frame, in the real world, in the person whose voice was used and what has since come to light about that person. The show made the call that those two things couldn't be separated. Whether you agree with the call or not, I understand the logic. Leon Kompowski is therefore in a strange position among one-time characters. He's one of the most famous from one of the most famous episodes, and yet the episode can't really be discussed without this additional weight that has nothing to do with the story. There's something worth sitting with about what it means for a single episode to be fully removed from a show's official archive. The Simpsons has been through other controversies, episodes temporarily pulled for various reasons, content that aged badly, a character whose voice actor stepped back. In almost every case, the episodes remained available. Stark Raving Dad is different. It's the only case where the decision was complete and maintained, which means there's a whole generation of viewers who came to the show on Disney Plus and on streaming and have never encountered Leon Kompowski through official channels. He exists in memory for older fans and in various corners of the internet for the curious. The episode is findable if you go looking, but it doesn't come to you the way the other 687 episodes do. That changes what Leon is. He's not just a one-time character whose episode concluded. He's a one-time character whose episode was concluded for him from outside. His tombstone isn't in Springfield Cemetery as far as I know. He checked himself out. The birthday song is still quite sweet for what it's worth. A boy in a psychiatric institution helped a difficult kid write it for his sister, and she liked it. El viaje misterioso de nuestro Homer, that's roughly the mysterious voyage of our Homer, is Season 8, Episode 9, aired in January 1997. It's a strange and beautiful episode, and the character at its center exists for maybe 7 or 8 minutes of screen time and is voiced by Johnny Cash. And that sentence alone should give you some sense of the level the show was operating at in this period. There's a specific quality to this episode that separates it from most of the other Character of the Week installments we're discussing tonight. The other episodes are more or less realist, which is a strange word to apply to a cartoon, but they operate within the show's established physics, within its social world, within recognizable Springfield. This one goes somewhere else. It leaves. Homer eats the peppers, and the episode departs from everything that surrounds it into a painted desert of melting pyramids and talking animals. And it stays there long enough that when Homer comes back, the transition feels like waking up from something real. The hallucination sequence was animated differently from the rest of the episode. A more fluid, less cel-shaded style that gave the desert scenes their specific quality. It's one of the most visually distinctive extended sequences in the show's run, and it benefits from not being too long. The coyote appears, talks to Homer for a few minutes, and then Homer wakes up. The sequence doesn't overstay its welcome. It delivers what it came to deliver and then ends. That discipline, knowing when to stop, is one of the things the golden era did consistently that later seasons didn't always manage. The setup, Springfield holds its annual chili cook-off, which Homer attends under promise to Marge that he won't embarrass her by getting drunk. He manages this by eating increasingly spicy chili instead, culminating in a bowl prepared by Police Chief Wiggum with Guatemalan insanity peppers. Described as grown in the fertile volcanic soil of a small Guatemalan village, used by Mayan priests to see into the underworld, Homer eats them all. His mouth is briefly on fire, and then he's somewhere else entirely. The chili cook-off that opens the episode is a wonderful piece of Springfield world building. It's an annual event and a significant social occasion. People enter with genuine pride. The competition is taken seriously. Homer's relationship with it is, as with most things, principally about his appetite rather than his competitive instinct. He eats the other contestants' entries rather than judging them objectively. He eats Wiggum's entry because Wiggum is guarding it, and Homer's response to being told something is forbidden is to want it immediately. The hallucination sequence that follows is genuinely lovely animation. Desert and pyramids and melting colors, quite different from the show's usual palette. And at the center of it, a coyote made of light steps out of a pyramid and speaks. The coyote is Homer's spirit guide. The coyote is voiced by Johnny Cash. Cash's voice in this episode has a specific quality that I describe as unhurried gravity. He's not performing. He's just talking slowly in that unmistakable register, and everything he says lands with a kind of gentle authority. He tells Homer that every person has a soulmate, one true spiritual partner, and that Homer must find his. He tells Homer this while they walk through a desert together, which is the most natural thing in the world if you're Homer Simpson, and your spirit guide is a luminous coyote narrated by the man in black. The coyote says something that I've always found quietly interesting. This is just your memory. I can't give you any new information. He's a projection of Homer's subconscious. He knows only what Homer knows. He can guide but not reveal. It's a more philosophically careful thing to put in a hallucination sequence than most episodes would bother with. Homer wakes up and spends the second half of the episode convinced that Marge isn't his soulmate, that the coyote was telling him to find someone else. He wanders around Springfield in the dark, investigating other people, looking for the missing connection. He ends up at a lighthouse. Marge finds him. They argue. Homer explains his reasoning, and Marge says something along the lines of, "I'm right here." "When were you looking?" The lighthouse is both characters accepting something about each other, wordlessly, in the way the show does emotional resolutions when it's at its best. Homer wasn't looking for someone different. He was looking for his wife and not recognizing her, which is a different kind of lostness. This is one of the things the show did better than almost any other comedy of its era. The argument that love is not a grand discovery, but a recurring choice. And that the failure to see what's in front of you is the central human error, rather than the failure to find something absent. Homer was eating an experimental chili and having a supernatural experience, and the conclusion was, go home. Look at the person who came to the cook-off with you. She's the one. You already knew this. The coyote didn't tell him anything new as it said it wouldn't. It just helped him hear what he already knew. Cash was 64 years old when he recorded his lines for this episode. He died 6 years later in 2003. By the time of the recording, he had been through considerable personal difficulty. The years of addiction and recovery, the complicated relationship with mainstream country music, and had arrived at the particular late career authority that came from all of that. His voice in 1997 had something it wouldn't have had in 1967. A specific gravity that came from the accumulation of experience. Whatever he said, you listened. The animators designed the coyote specifically to suit the voice, which is a lovely way of working. The animal and the man feel like one thing. The coyote disappears when Homer wakes up, because of course it does. It was a vision. It wasn't real, except in the way all good hallucinations are real. As a story, the unconscious tells about what it already knows but hasn't said yet. The coyote, made of light and walking through a Mayan desert in a cartoon, is still there if you want to find it. Still asking whether you've looked at the person next to you properly. Lisa vs. Malibu Stacy is Season 5, Episode 14, aired in February 1994. It's a Lisa episode, which means it's about injustice and the difficulty of changing things and the specific frustration of being 8 years old and seeing clearly. Lisa episodes are usually good. This one is great. The new talking Malibu Stacy doll has been released, and Lisa is appalled by what it says. The phrases include things like, "Thinking too much gives you wrinkles," and "Let's bake some cookies for the boys," and one about shopping being fun, that I won't quote directly, but which made Lisa put the doll down like it was on fire. It's not a subtle episode. The show isn't trying to be subtle. It's making a point about a specific kind of product and who designs it and what it tells the people it's aimed at. Lisa decides to find the original creator of the Malibu Stacy doll and get her to make something better. The original creator is Stacy Lovell, voiced by Kathleen Turner, who is introduced sitting in a darkened room surrounded by evidence of everything that went wrong after she made her creation. She sold the company, she lost control of the product, she has watched for decades as the doll she made became something she didn't intend. She has multiple ex-husbands, one of whom was the doll's original Ken equivalent, who turned out to be gay and is now apparently in a relationship with the Barbie equivalent. The episode delivers this information casually as a background detail, while Turner is playing it magnificently. The line that tends to get remembered is Stacy responding to a request for her involvement with, "Not now, I'm too drunk." Delivered absolutely flat. Perfect. But what the episode does with Stacy is more interesting than the laughs. She agrees to help Lisa make a new doll, the Lisa Simpson doll, with actual thoughts and actual values. They make it together, it gets manufactured, it goes on sale, one little girl buys it. Because the following week, the Malibu Stacy Corporation releases a new version of their doll with a new hat, and it sells millions, and the Lisa doll gets buried in the noise. One little girl. That's the result of all the work. The show is quite honest about what this means, and quite honest that it's not nothing. Lisa is disappointed but not destroyed. The one little girl who has the doll will grow up with it. That matters, even if it doesn't change the numbers on the chart. There's also a Grandpa Simpson subplot in this episode. He gets a job at the Krusty Burger and becomes briefly famous for his age, then is fired when someone younger and stranger becomes available. And it runs alongside the Lisa plot in a way that seems coincidental but isn't. Both stories are about being replaced by something shinier. Both stories are about the specific cruelty of institutional indifference. The episode holds them together without making the parallel explicit, which is the right way to do it. There's a reading of this episode as being about the show itself, the people making it, inside a corporate structure that was always more interested in selling merchandise than in what the content said. And I think that reading is probably intentional. The show made a doll called the Malibu Stacy that said stupid things. It also made an episode making fun of that. Both things are true simultaneously. Turner's performance has a specific quality of someone who has been in the room where decisions were made and knows exactly how those decisions work. Stacy Lovell isn't surprised that her doll became something she didn't want. She's just tired of it. Her weariness is authentic and carefully judged, and it's what makes her a character rather than just a vehicle for the episode's argument. Stacy Lovell doesn't return after this episode. She made what she came to make. Her arc ends at the point of manufacture, which seems right. The making was her job, not the selling. The one little girl who buys the Lisa doll, she's seen briefly, she's delighted, she carries it away, is the episode's answer to its own pessimism. Not a triumphant answer, not a reassuring one, just a real one. One girl. That happened. Turner was an interesting casting choice because she brought a specific kind of weariness to the role that a younger voice wouldn't have. The quality of someone who had made something she was proud of and spent years watching it become something else. That takes a certain kind of weight to play convincingly. Turner had it. And there's one more thing about this episode I want to name because I think it gets missed in discussions that focus on the Lisa/doll storyline. The episode is essentially about what it means to make something in a commercial context. Stacy Lovell made the Malibu Stacy doll and then lost control of it. She made it for one set of reasons, and it became something serving completely different ones. Lisa and Stacy tried to correct this, to make a thing that means what they want it to mean, and the market buries it under a hat. The show, I suspect, knew this dynamic from the inside. The Simpsons was also a commercial product. It also existed inside a corporate structure that wanted to sell merchandise. It also kept making episodes that said things the merchandise didn't say. Both things were true simultaneously. The Lisa Simpson doll is on a shelf somewhere. The new Malibu Stacy with the hat sold millions. The show kept making the doll anyway for 36 years and counting. Bart's Girlfriend is Season 6, Episode 7, aired in November 1994. It stars Meryl Streep in a voice role, which is one of those sentences that makes you realize how unusual the show's casting was at this point. They were getting people who had no commercial reason to do this, who just found the material interesting and wanted to be in it. The episode is a reversal. Bart Simpson, the show's designated bad boy, the 10-year-old delinquent, who's been causing trouble since season 1, falls for a girl and discovers she is considerably worse than he is. Not misunderstood, not troubled in an explicable way, just genuinely, cheerfully awful. Jessica Lovejoy is the Reverend's daughter. She appears angelic. She sings in the choir and smiles at the congregation and helps old women across streets. Bart is completely taken. He's never encountered someone who is actually more delinquent than him, and he finds it magnetic in a way he can't quite parse. The specific mechanics of Jessica's manipulation are worth laying out because the episode is careful about them. She doesn't manipulate Bart through affection alone. She understands him well enough to know that he's attracted to transgression, and she uses his own impulses as a tool. By getting him to break rules alongside her, she makes him feel complicit. By framing the rule breaking as something they share, she creates a sense of intimacy that doesn't actually exist. Bart, for most of the show's run, is the one running this particular playbook. He knows how to be charming. He knows how to use his apparent guilelessness as cover. Jessica is better at all of it than he is, and she's better at it in the way that's most devastating. She's better at it without appearing to try. The specific act that breaks the episode open: Jessica steals money from the church collection plate and lets Bart take the blame. He almost accepts it. He's so besotted that absorbing the consequence feels, in some confused way, like a form of closeness. Streep played Jessica with a specific sweetness that made the manipulation feel genuinely startling. There's a line delivery, I'm not going to quote it directly, where Jessica explains to Bart, with total sincerity, that she enjoys doing terrible things, and Streep plays it as though she's describing a favorite hobby. The gap between the register and the content is the whole joke, and it's a very precise joke. Streep has said in passing that she liked the character's specificity, that Jessica wasn't a generic bad girl, but a particular kind of person, the kind who performs goodness so convincingly that the performance becomes invisible. The dream sequence in this episode, where Jessica literally reaches into Bart's chest and removes his heart, is one of the show's more visceral images. It's played as a nightmare, which is accurate, but it also functions as a rather literal description of what she's been doing throughout the episode. Bart knows what's happening to him, he just doesn't care enough to stop. That's its own kind of tragedy. The episode ends with Jessica caught by the congregation and Bart walking away. The specific quality of the ending, Bart is embarrassed but not destroyed, the experience is added to his catalog of things he's survived, suits him. Lovejoy is, throughout the series, a figure of slightly exhausted institutional religion. He does the job, he means well enough, he's not particularly inspiring. His daughter is genuinely diabolical. The episode never makes the connection explicit, but the parallel is there. The church as an institution producing someone who has learned to use its language and forms purely as social cover. Jessica knows exactly how to look like what the church expects, and she uses that knowledge with complete cynicism. It's a fairly pointed joke, delivered without editorializing. Jessica is still there in the show's logic. The Reverend didn't move away. She's presumably still in Springfield, a few years older, and I imagine she'd be extraordinary. Since we're on the topic of the show, doing parody versions of famous things and making them entirely their own, and we weren't really on that topic, but we are now, let's talk about Sherry Bobbins. Simpson, califragilisticexpiala, annoyed grunt. Just as Season 8, Episode 13, aired in February 1997. The title takes some doing. The episode is a direct Mary Poppins parody, which Disney was not delighted about, and which the show handled by making the character similar enough to be unmistakable and different enough to maintain that it was an original creation. The character's name was carefully not Mary Poppins. Her origin was slightly different. Her umbrella was hers and not a parrot. She arrives floating from a cloud in a thunderstorm, which is not entirely different from the opening of Mary Poppins. She has magical abilities. She was once engaged to groundskeeper Willie, which did not end well, and she occasionally mentions this with a rueful quality that suggests she's made peace with it. The doomed engagement to Willie is presented almost as a throwaway detail. She mentions it once. Willie reacts to her arrival with suppressed anguish, and the episode moves on. But it does something quietly important. It means she has a history in Springfield. She's not arriving from some neutral nowhere. She came from here, or near enough here, and something went wrong and she left. And now she's back in the one context where her abilities are requested. The songs written for the episode are genuinely impressive parody work. They're structured like the originals, but filled with Springfield-specific content. A spoonful of sugar becomes about feeding vegetables to children by disguising them. The counterpart here involves considerably more alcohol and a significantly less optimistic worldview. The show's music department was at a high point in this period, and the episode benefits from that. Sherry Bobbins' function in the story is to fix The Simpsons, which she cannot do. She tries, with genuine effort, for the middle section of the episode. She teaches Bart to find the joy in household chores. She encourages Lisa's creative instincts. She sings Homer into a better mood about his life. It works for a while, in the immediate way that things sometimes work when you pour energy into them. And then, gradually, it doesn't. The Simpsons are what they are. They absorb the improvement and return to baseline like a very specific kind of elastic. Sherry Bobbins, who evidently has standards, starts quietly adjusting her approach. By the end, she's just telling them what they want to hear, which is what everyone eventually does with this family. The Mary Poppins comparison is unavoidable, but it's worth noting what the episode does with the source material beyond simple parody. Mary Poppins leaves because her work is done. Sherry Bobbins leaves because she's given up. That's a darker reading of the premise, and the show commits to it. The specific songs written for the episode are better than they need to be. There's a number about Bart doing his chores that has genuinely good rhymes and a hook that lands properly. There's a song about Homer's drinking that operates on about 4 levels simultaneously. It's funny, it's accurate, it's slightly sad, and it still functions as a song rather than just a joke with a tune. The show produced original music throughout its run with variable quality, but the Sherry Bobbins episode is one where you feel the music department really leaned in. Alf Clausen, who scored the show for most of its golden era, was at his best in episodes like this, episodes that needed original material rather than just underscore. Season 8 was the last season of what most people consider the classic Simpsons, and this episode aired in February 1997, which puts it toward the end of that run. The show was doing something in this season that it would lose in subsequent years, a willingness to commit completely to unusual premises without hedging or signaling. The nanny is literally called Sherry Bobbins. The episode is a full Mary Poppins parody. and it ends with a jet engine. The show put all of that in without a wink at the camera. That confidence is part of what makes it work. She floats away on her umbrella. The family waves goodbye. She rises into the sky with her carpet bag, probably thinking about other families who might be more receptive, and then she gets sucked into a jet engine. The family keeps waving for a beat, and then they go inside. It's a perfect ending, not mean-spirited, as the show doesn't seem to dislike Sherry Bobbins, but honest in the way the show is when it's at its most confident. Some things can't be fixed. Some families are what they are. And the nanny who flew in on a cloud is sucked into a jet engine, and the family goes inside for dinner, and that's the ending. The episode is sometimes considered slightly underrated in the show's golden era catalog. It's not among the first ones people cite, possibly because the parody element makes it feel like a one-joke premise, even though it's considerably more than that. The character has more depth than a parody nanny needs to have. The jet engine ending is funny, yes, it's a perfectly timed bit of cartoon violence. But it's also the episode saying, this was a character who came to fix something unfixable and exhausted herself in the attempt, and then got on her umbrella and the universe handled the rest. No notes. And also no more nannies after this, because the show apparently decided one was enough. Chester J. Lampwick is 103 years old when Bart finds him. He's living in a Springfield district called Bumtown, in a cardboard box holding a cocktail napkin. On the cocktail napkin is a drawing, Itchy the Mouse, the violent half of the Itchy and Scratchy show in his original design. Chester drew it in 1919. He sold the character for a sandwich and a small amount of money. The episode is specific about this being not very much money at all, and never saw another cent. Roger Myers Sr., who founded the studio, took the drawing and built an empire. Chester spent the better part of the century living in poverty while Itchy's face was on lunchboxes and backpacks and the side of aeroplanes. The episode where all this unfolds is The Day the Violence Died, Season 7, Episode 18, aired in March 1996. It's a very particular kind of Simpsons episode, the kind that's about the show's own history, or at least a fictional version of it, and that uses that history to make an argument about copyright and creative ownership, and what happens to the people who make things when the machinery that profits from those things has no interest in them. Bart goes to bat for Chester. This is one of the episodes where Bart's genuine moral core shows through. He finds an injustice, he can't let it go, he does something about it, often in ways that cause additional complications. He helps Chester take Roger Myers Jr. to court, with Lionel Hutz as an attorney, which is not a reassuring combination, but they win. The courtroom scenes are played with a very particular kind of comic confidence. Hutz is catastrophically incompetent as a lawyer. This is well established across multiple episodes, and yet they win, because Chester has the cocktail napkin, and sometimes the facts really are sufficient. Chester is awarded the rights to Itchy. The studio is bankrupted. He's compensated for what was taken from him. There's a background joke in the episode where the Itchy and Scratchy studio, destroyed as a consequence of the lawsuit, briefly brings in 2 Schoolhouse Rock parody characters to produce the show instead. The show doesn't dwell on this. Chester got his money. The studio got what was coming to it. The rocket car is paid for. His life after winning, a gold house, a rocket car. He explains to a reporter, "I'm not greedy. As long as I've got my health, my millions of dollars, my gold house, and my rocket car, I don't need anything else." I don't know what that says about him exactly, but it's a very satisfying sentence. The episode is partly a real argument about early animation history. The story of Chester Lampwick is not entirely unlike the actual stories of people like Max Fleischer and other early animation figures who created foundational work and found themselves on the wrong side of various arrangements with studios and corporations that had much better lawyers. The specific mechanism by which Chester lost his creation, a handshake deal, a small immediate payment, no lawyers, no future royalties, no acknowledgement, maps directly onto that actual history. creators routinely signed away enormous value for small, immediate compensation because they had no context for understanding what those creations would eventually be worth. Chester is 103 in the episode and was apparently in his mid-40s when he made Itchy, which puts his creation date somewhere around the 1930s, consistent with the actual history the episode is referencing. The show used the fictional frame to make the point more directly than a documentary could. Chester himself is a wonderful creation as a character. He's 103, he's bitter, he's perfectly justified in the bitterness. And he has a specific dignity underneath the anger. The dignity of someone who knows exactly what was done to them and has spent decades waiting for the accounting. When it comes, he buys a rocket car. That seems right. He doesn't come back after this episode. He's in his gold house. He has what he came for. Albert Brooks voiced two completely different one-time characters across the show's run, and both of them are considered among the great guest performances in its history. We've already talked about Hank Scorpio. The other one is from Season 5, Episode 7. Bart's Inner Child aired in October 1993. And the character is a self-help guru named Brad Goodman. Brooks is very good at playing a specific kind of warmth that conceals emptiness. With Scorpio, the warmth was genuine. Scorpio was genuinely kind. He just also happened to be trying to take over the world. With Brad Goodman, the warmth is entirely performed, and the emptiness is the whole person. The two characters are using the same performance tools for opposite purposes, and the contrast is interesting to sit with. Goodman arrives in Springfield to put on a self-help seminar, the kind where the audience is encouraged to believe that their authentic selves are always correct and that acting on impulse is the path to personal freedom. Homer attends and has what appears to be a breakthrough. He brings the family. Goodman watches Bart do something impulsive and inappropriate. Bart is always doing something impulsive and inappropriate, and frames it as enlightenment. Bart becomes the mascot of the movement. The episode's diagnosis of the self-help genre is fairly precise without being cruel about it. It doesn't argue that everything Goodman says is wrong. Some of the principles he advocates, taken individually, are unobjectionable. The problem is the context, a philosophy of infinite self-permission, presented without any account of the difference between authentic impulse and destructive impulse, sold to a town that has never needed encouragement to act without thinking. Springfield is perhaps not the ideal test case for do what you feel. For a brief period, Springfield adopts the philosophy wholesale. People start saying whatever they think without filtering it. Arguments break out, various kinds of antisocial behavior get attributed to authentic self-expression. The town organizes a Do What You Feel festival because of course it does. The festival goes wrong immediately. The infrastructure of the event, roller coasters, carnival rides, various structural elements, was designed by people who felt like doing certain things and felt like not doing other things, including checking their work. Things break down, there are injuries. Goodman is gone by this point. He was gone before the festival. That's the thing about this type. They collect the money, they deliver the message, they move on before the consequences arrive. Springfield is just one of many towns he's passed through with his charts and his warmth, and his absolute conviction that acting on impulse is the same as wisdom. Goodman never returned. He's somewhere else, probably doing another seminar, collecting another town's enthusiasm, and moving on before the festival. And since we're on the topic of Albert Brooks for a moment, his two Simpsons appearances, Scorpio and Goodman, happened within 2 seasons of each other, Goodman in Season 5, Scorpio in Season 8, and represent something about the range the show was operating with in that period. In the space of 3 years, Brooks gave the show a genuine villain who was also its most lovable character, and a genuine fraud who was its most convincingly performed hollow person. The show asked a lot of its guest actors in this era, and Brooks delivered twice over in completely different registers. The idea of infinite, authentic self-expression is appealing in the abstract. It's only in practice, and specifically in practice in Springfield, that it collapses. There's something quietly accurate in that, Springfield is a town where the residents are already largely doing what they feel, more or less constantly. What they needed from Goodman wasn't permission. What they needed was something Goodman doesn't have and wasn't selling. Homer versus the 18th Amendment is Season 8, Episode 15, aired in March 1997, and it's built around a premise that only works because the show commits to it absolutely. A Springfield bylaw from the Prohibition era is discovered to still be on the books, and the town is legally required to enforce it. No alcohol. Springfield goes dry. The episode has a subplot involving the founding of Springfield, which establishes that the original settlers were fleeing religious persecution and arrived in the New World with the intention of drinking heavily without interference. The Puritan parallel is inverted. These are Puritans who want to be left alone to drink. The founding document of Springfield essentially is a covenant in favor of alcohol. This matters for the agent the government sends to enforce the law because it means he's running directly against the founding principles of the town he's in. He's enforcing sobriety in a place that was settled specifically by people who objected to sobriety being enforced. Homer, faced with the situation, becomes a bootlegger. He's surprisingly good at it, which is consistent with the show's logic about Homer. He's capable of genuine competence when the task suits his particular skill set, and the particular skill set required for bootlegging is apparently one he has. The government, upon learning that Springfield has a significant alcohol problem it's now legally obligated to address, sends an agent. His name is Rex Banner. He is played by Dave Thomas, and he's operating from a completely different era. Banner speaks exclusively in 1920s federal agent slang. Every sentence he produces sounds like it was written for a film noir that was itself written in 1931. Listen, Rummy, I'm going to say it plain and simple. Where'd you pinch the hooch? Is some blind tiger jerking suds on the side? Is a real sentence he says in this episode, and it lands completely because Thomas plays it with perfect earnestness. Banner is not performing. He genuinely speaks this way. It's the only way he knows how to speak. The comedy of the episode is Banner being completely outmaneuvered by Homer, not because Homer is clever, but because the methods Banner knows how to use are calibrated for a kind of criminal that Homer isn't. Homer is too chaotic, too accidental, too genuinely difficult to track through rational investigative methods. Banner hunts with precision instruments. Homer isn't a target that precision instruments can locate. The beer baron, Homer's bootlegger, alias, becomes a Springfield folk hero. Banner becomes increasingly frustrated and increasingly committed, which is what makes him a good character. He believes in what he's doing. He's not cynical about enforcement. He has genuine conviction that this law matters and should be upheld. And the law is both absurd and technically valid. And his conviction is therefore both admirable and entirely misplaced. Thomas is better known to some audiences as one half of the SCTV comedy duo Bob and Doug McKenzie. His commitment to Banner's period authenticity is total. He never breaks character, never winks at the audience, plays every line with complete sincerity. The comedy is in the gap between the sincerity and the absurdity of the context, and that gap is sustained for the entire episode without collapsing. His end is being catapulted into the sky from a carnival ride. The law's own resources removing him, which is the episode's final joke at his expense. The town cheers because they've already stopped caring about prohibition. The law is repealed immediately. Homer retires from bootlegging. Banner, presumably, landed somewhere. The episode is sometimes cited as one of the show's best single-joke premises executed over a full half hour, which is a fair description. Banner staying Banner throughout, certain and doomed and oddly dignified, is a performance achievement. And there's something worth saying about the show's specific use of Homer in this episode that doesn't always get noted. Homer's incompetence as the beer baron is not a departure from his character. It's precisely his character. His methods of distributing alcohol are so idiosyncratic. Bowling balls with hollow centers, Santa hats used as carrying vessels, a kind of inspired chaos that defies pattern recognition. that rational forensic analysis can't touch them. Banner keeps looking for the criminal architecture of a bootlegging operation. Homer doesn't have criminal architecture. He has improvisation and luck and the specific Teflon quality of someone who never thinks 2 steps ahead and therefore can't be outmaneuvered 2 steps ahead. The joke is Banner applying a sophisticated tool to a problem that is fundamentally too stupid for it. That gap between the precision of the method and the chaos of the target is the whole episode. Thomas holds his end of it beautifully for 22 minutes. Trash of the Titans is Season 9, Episode 22, aired in April 1998, and it was the show's 200th episode. For a milestone like that, the show made what is essentially a very bleak argument about democracy, and then resolved it by moving the entire town of Springfield 1 mile down the road. Ray Patterson is the sanitation commissioner of Springfield. He's voiced by Steve Martin, who plays him as a particular kind of competent public servant. The type who does his job well, doesn't make a fuss about it, and expects the quality of his work to speak for itself. He's good at what he does. Springfield's bin collection works. Things are fine. Martin's casting is interesting because he's associated in his most famous work with physical and verbal comedy at high energy. Patterson is the opposite, a quiet, competent bureaucrat whose best moments are moments of restrained exasperation. Martin's willingness to play that register, to do the straight role that makes Homer funnier by contrast, is part of what makes the character work. Then Homer gets a fine for putting out his bins in a non-regulation bag, becomes furious, and decides to run against Patterson in the sanitation election on a platform of giving people whatever they want. His campaign slogan is essentially, "Everything will be great, and none of it will cost you anything." Patterson's campaign is, "I'm competent, and things work." Patterson is not unaware of Homer. He turns up to a Homer campaign event, looks around, and says something along the lines of, "I've been doing this job well for years, and this is what I'm up against." He isn't panicked, and he's just tired. Homer wins. By a significant margin, Springfield voters choose the candidate who promised them things that can't be delivered over the candidate who had been delivering results. The show is making a point here that it made in several other ways across its run, that the mechanism by which decisions are made in public life is susceptible to performance in a way that's not necessarily correlated with quality of outcome. Homer performs confidence, Patterson performs competence. Confidence is more entertaining. Springfield votes accordingly. Votes. What follows is Homer bankrupting the department, making it impossible for Springfield to collect its own rubbish, and eventually agreeing to take on every other town's waste in the state for money, which is the only way he can fund the promises he made. Springfield fills up with rubbish. The abstraction of fiscal irresponsibility becomes concrete. Rubbish everywhere. Rubbish in the streets. Rubbish as far as the camera can see. It becomes a health crisis. Homer has to go and find Patterson. Patterson's response to being asked to come back and fix the mess. Measured, tired, correct. He does it. He fixes it by relocating the entire town over the rubbish dump they've created, which is possibly the most pragmatic solution to a problem in the show's run. Martin plays Patterson with a specific wariness that suits the character perfectly. The quality of someone who had an outcome explained to them before the event, and then watched it happen exactly as predicted. There's no triumph in being right in this way. The damage still has to be cleaned up, and you're the one who has to do it. The 200th episode being about a competent person being fired by popular vote and having to clean up the resulting mess is a choice. The show knew it was a choice. Patterson is still out there, presumably, continuing to do the job correctly without anybody noticing. There's a moment in the episode where Homer's campaign is in full swing and Patterson shows up, looks around at the crowd, and says something to the effect of, "Fine, if this is what you want." It's not a concession speech or a rallying cry. It's just a tired man in a thankless job watching the situation develop exactly as he'd predicted. Steve Martin plays the moment with complete economy. No performance, just the specific stillness of someone who's been right too many times to be surprised by being right again. That one moment is worth more than most characters get in a full episode. Patterson earned his place on this list on the strength of that beat alone. The rest of the episode just confirms it. Herb Powell technically appeared in 2 episodes, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou in Season 2, and Brother, Can You Spare 2 Dimes in Season 3, which would usually disqualify him from a list like this one. But the 2 episodes function so completely as a single story, with a clear beginning and end and a complete arc between them, that it feels dishonest to leave him out on a technicality. He's here. He's voiced by Danny DeVito, which is perfect casting in a way that feels obvious in retrospect but was probably not obvious when the decision was being made. DeVito's energy in this role is something I find genuinely interesting to analyze, because he plays Herb Powell as a man who is enormously successful, and underneath that, enormously alone. And the transition between those 2 things when Homer arrives is handled with a lightness that makes it hurt more. Herb Powell is Homer's half-brother. He was given up for adoption at birth by Abraham Simpson, who had an affair and couldn't acknowledge the child. Herb grew up knowing nothing about his biological family. He built himself into the head of Powell Motors, a major American car company, through his own effort, which makes him in some ways a more successful version of Frank Grimes, which is its own interesting parallel. He worked hard and the work paid off. He just didn't have anybody to share it with. Then he finds Homer. He's delighted, completely, genuinely delighted. He has a family now. He invites them all to his enormous house. He wants to know everything about them. He asks Homer to design a car. The car design process is the episode's comedic centerpiece, and it works because Homer's design philosophy is completely earnest. He's not trying to make a bad car. He genuinely believes that every feature he's specifying is something the average person wants. The La Cucaracha horn is, in Homer's model of the world, a fun thing that drivers will enjoy pressing. The enormous cup holder is a genuine quality of life improvement for the beverage-conscious commuter. The child bubble dome is an expression of care for parents who want peace. The car costs around $82,000, which places it out of reach of every human being Homer actually knows. The irony of the average person's car being unaffordable to the average person is never noted by Homer, who genuinely doesn't see it. DeVito plays the moment of revelation, the car show, the prototype unveiled, the crowd's reaction, with a very specific quality of understanding arriving and being processed in real time. Herb watches the audience response before Homer does. He sees the disaster before Homer knows anything has gone wrong. And the choice he makes in that moment, not to blame Homer immediately, not to say anything in the room full of people, to absorb the information privately, is a grace note that makes him sympathetic even in the moment of his destruction. The company folds. Herb loses everything. He blames Homer. He has every right to. He sends him home. The second episode, which came the following season, picks up with Herb destitute. He approaches the Simpson family at a fairground, broke and unrecognized. He has a device, a baby translator that converts infant babbling into coherent speech. He believes in it. He asks Homer for seed money to develop it. Homer gives it to him. Without negotiation, just gives it. The device works. It works extremely well. Herb becomes wealthy again, pays Homer back, and the family is restored to something like its proper configuration. Homer giving Herb the money, without fanfare, without speech, is one of the moments where the show remembers that Homer, for all his disasters, is not ultimately a selfish person. He causes enormous amounts of damage through incompetence and inattention. But when someone he loves needs something and he has the capacity to give it, he gives it. That's worth something. There's a throwaway joke in a season 24 episode about 20 seasons after Herb's second appearance, where his answering machine message is heard to say, "I'm poor again." No context, no explanation, just that. It's unclear whether this is a genuine narrative update or just a gag. But if it's true, then Herb Powell has now cycled through enormous wealth and ruin at least twice, and Homer was involved in both the loss and the recovery, which is a very specific kind of relationship to have with someone. DeVito reportedly loved the character and has expressed interest in returning to it at various points. The show hasn't brought Herb back properly since season 3. He's out there somewhere, the answering machine version of him anyway. Possibly reassembling his fortune for a third time, possibly not. The Homer is presumably still out there too in a junkyard somewhere. Its La Cucaracha horn silent, its child bubble dome empty, taking up more space than it should. The thing about the Homer, the Kane, the car, is that it's a perfect comedy object, but it's also a genuinely interesting object. Homer designed a car for the average person, and the average person can't afford it. Homer designed a car with a separate children's bubble for peace and quiet, which is what a parent wants, and put it in a price bracket where no parent could ever buy it. Homer designed a car that solves every problem he personally has and missed completely that his personal problems aren't representative problems. Every specification makes sense for Homer's life. None of them make sense for anyone else's. Herb understood this, or rather Herb felt it, arriving before he could articulate it. But by then it was too late. The car had been approved through the design process. The prototype was in the showroom. The logic of the company had already absorbed Homer's catastrophically idiosyncratic vision and turned it into a product. That's how disasters happen, actually. Not through malice, but through a process that kept saying yes when it should have said wait. It's a fairly sophisticated piece of satire about product design and the way user research can be entirely useless if the user being consulted is the wrong user. The show didn't announce it as satire, it just made the episode. Summer of 4 Feet 2 is Season 7, Episode 25. Aired in May 1996, and it's the quietest episode on this list. Nothing dramatic happens in it. No one is trying to take over the world. There's no villain, no con man, no grand scheme. It's just Lisa Simpson spending a summer at a beach house, and for once, not being alone. The particular cruelty of school social dynamics, the kind that Lisa has been navigating since season 1, is that they're often not the result of specific malice. No one has a vendetta against Lisa. She's not bullied in the traditional sense. She's just not included. The exclusion is ambient, structural, the result of accumulated small signals about what kind of person she is and whether that kind of person fits. Springfield Elementary as an institution is not built for Lisa. It barely tolerates her intelligence, consistently misunderstands her emotional register, and offers her precisely one peer. Allison Taylor, who appears briefly in a few episodes, who comes close to understanding her. Everything else about her school experience is some version of wrong placement. Too smart for the comfort of her classmates, too earnest for the social dynamics of a 10-year-old girl's peer group, too interested in things that nobody else in the room finds interesting. She carries this everywhere. She carried it to the beach house without meaning to. The summer erases those accumulated signals because no one at the beach knows them. Lisa arrives without her history, and the people there respond to what she is rather than what they've decided she is. The Simpson family goes to the Flanders beach house for the summer. Lisa, tired of being the kid everyone at school ignores or actively avoids, decides to reinvent herself. She dresses differently. She doesn't mention books or jazz or anything that makes people look at her the way they usually look at her. She just wanders down to the beach and starts talking to people. She meets Aaron and her group. They like her. This is the detail the episode handles most carefully. They just like her. Not because she's performing a version of herself or hiding who she is, but because she's relaxed for once, because she's not bracing for rejection. And the ease that comes from that is apparently enough for people to be drawn to her naturally. She and Aaron have a genuine friendship over the course of the episode. They hang out, they talk, they do normal summer things. Bart, being Bart, eventually finds Lisa's Springfield Elementary yearbook and shows Aaron and the group. The evidence of Lisa's ordinary school life, the photos, the voted least popular, the general archive of everything she was trying to escape for the summer. Lisa goes back to the beach house and waits for them not to come. They come. Aaron brings the group. They've decorated the Simpsons car with shells and beach glass and bits of rope. This enormous labor of affection, this hours-long project. And Aaron's explanation for why is roughly, "Yeah, we saw your yearbook, so what? You're our friend." Aaron's most memorable line, delivered at some point in the middle of the episode. "Yeah, doing stuff sucks." She means it as a compliment. It's the most thoroughly laid-back possible endorsement of Lisa's company. The confidence of that moment, Aaron and the group showing up regardless, having put in hours of work, is the most generous thing in the episode. The episode ends with the family driving home, the car covered in shells, and Lisa looking out to the back window. It's not a sad ending, it's a summer is over ending, which is different. The things that happen in summers are real even when the summer ends. The season 7 finale choosing to close on this episode, after a run that included Cape Fear and other more high-energy installments, says something about what the showrunners valued. They wanted the season to end quietly and warmly. Erin never appears again. She lives at the beach town. Lisa goes back to Springfield. They presumably don't write, or if they do, the show doesn't follow it. Erin was a summer friend, and the episode understood that summer friends are a specific category with their own specific weight. I find this episode affecting in a way that's disproportionate to how much is in it. There's no dramatic confrontation, no revelation, no scene that announces itself as the emotional climax. It's just a girl who needed to not be lonely for a while, and a girl who happened to like her, and a car full of shells. That's all it is. Lisa Simpson is, across the show's run, one of the loneliest characters in the series. Not because she's unloved, but because the gap between how she thinks and how most of the people around her think is wide enough that genuine connection keeps being slightly out of reach. There are episodes throughout the show's history where this loneliness gets addressed, usually through a mentor figure, or a brief period of social belonging, or a specific friendship that doesn't last. Erin fits that pattern, but the episode handles it differently from most. It doesn't frame the friendship as a lesson Lisa learns, or a problem she solves, or a test she passes. It's just a summer, two people who liked each other. It ends because summers end. That refusal to frame it as more than it was is, I think, why the episode holds up. It's not about the meaning of the summer, it's about the summer. And that's enough. So, those are the ones I keep coming back to. There are others. Dozens, probably, if you went through every season and cataloged everyone who appeared once and vanished. But these are the ones with enough shape to spend time with. The ones where the single episode gave you enough to think about long after the credits rolled. There are a few worth briefly mentioning before we fully stop. Bleeding Gums Murphy, Lisa's saxophone mentor from an early episode, a grizzled jazz musician she met on a bridge at night, died in season 6, which is one of the show's genuinely affecting moments. He returned as a projection on a cloud to perform a song for Lisa at his own funeral, which is tonally unusual but emotionally correct. His grave is in Springfield Cemetery alongside Frank Grimes's. He was voiced by Ron Taylor, who died in 2002, and the character was retired after Taylor's death in the same spirit as the Hartman characters. He appears in background shots occasionally, on a tombstone in a memory, but his story is complete. What strikes me, going through all of them like this, is how many of them have something in common that I didn't notice when I was just watching the individual episodes. They're all in various ways about what happens when someone from outside the show's logic makes contact with it. Hank Scorpio is the best version of Homer's boss, but he exists in a different genre. Frank Grimes is a real person in a cartoon world. Mr. Bergstrom is a teacher who actually teaches. Carl is a secretary who actually helps. Herb Powell is family that actually wanted to connect. Even Lyle Landley is, in a strange way, someone operating with a clarity of purpose that Springfield's permanent residents don't have. He knew exactly what he was doing, even if what he was doing was wrong. The one-time characters are often the most functional people in the show. They arrive, they do what they came to do, and then they leave before the reset. They don't get the privilege of forgetting everything by the next episode. For them, what happens has consequences. And so they move through Springfield like people for whom things are real. And the contrast with the regular cast, who bounce off catastrophe like a very specific kind of rubber, is often where the episode's meaning lives. Springfield Cemetery has tombstones for a surprising number of the people we've talked about tonight. Frank Grimes, Bleeding Gums, Murphy, others. The show has this quiet habit of putting a small marker in the background, not announced, not pointed to, just there if you know to look, for the characters who came and went and mattered. I find that detail disproportionately moving, actually. It's the show's version of remembering. There's something about the show's relationship with death that I find quietly admirable. The way it handles the real deaths of voice actors by retiring their characters rather than recasting. It would be easier to just continue with new voices. It's a choice to say, this person was this character, and now that person is gone, and so the character is gone too. The show has been making that choice since the late 90s and has kept making it since. Edna Krabappel was retired following Marcia Wallace's death in 2013. The character's absence was acknowledged within the show, a chalkboard message, a brief moment, and then the world of Springfield continued without her. One-time characters don't get the chalkboard. They don't get the background cemetery shot. They just end quietly when their episode does and the show moves on. But some of them stay in the culture in ways that recurring characters don't always manage. Hank Scorpio's name means something specific to anyone who watched the show in the 90s. Lyle Lanley's song is one of the most recognizable pieces of music the show ever produced. Frank Grimes is a shorthand for an entire category of experience. The person who follows the rules and gets nothing, watching from across the desk while someone else gets everything without trying. They were in one episode each. That was enough. There are whole videos I could do about specific subgroups of these characters. The Treehouse of Horror one-timers, the ones who appeared as future versions of Springfield residents, the long line of characters voiced by people who had no commercial reason to do the show and just liked it. I'll probably get to those eventually, no promises on timing. Something I notice every time I go back to these episodes, they're better when you're tired. Not tired in the sense of not paying attention, but tired in the sense of being at the end of something, the end of a day, the end of a week, the particular late night state where your defenses are down and things land more directly than they would at noon. The Bergstrom note hits harder at midnight. The Scorpio ending lands softer. The Aaron section is almost unbearable at 2 a.m. in the best possible way. I don't know if the writers intended this. I think some of them might have, actually. There's a gentleness in the best of these episodes that feels calibrated for exactly this kind of watching. The half-asleep re-watching, the drifting alongside something familiar, the detail that snags your attention and pulls you briefly back in, which is, I suppose, how this video started. The show, as of early 2026, has been renewed through season 40. Bart is still 10 years old. Lisa is still 8. Homer still works at the plant for the same boss who can never remember his name. That's the thing about the golden era of this show. The emotional resolutions aren't loud. They don't come with music swells and camera push-ins and explicit dialogue explaining what you're supposed to feel. They come with a note on a piece of paper or a package from a man who sees the East Coast, or a car full of shells in a beach town car park, or a coyote made of stars in a hallucination desert saying, "Look at the person next to you." The show trusted its audience to bring the feeling. It just provided the occasion. And somewhere in the show's continuity, Hank Scorpio is still running the East Coast. Rex Banner is wherever the catapult took him. The coyote made of stars is in a desert waiting for the next person who eats the wrong thing at a chili cook-off and needs to be told something they already know. Chester Lampwick is in his gold house. Aaron is at the beach. They had their episodes. They were real in them. and the show, in its strange, immortal way, kept going without them. The way Springfield always does, carrying its memories in background tombstones and throwaway jokes and the specific warmth of rewatching something you've loved for a very long time. The note is still on the paper. The coyote is still in the desert. The hammock time is still scheduled. The note is still on the paper. The coyote is still in the desert. The hammock time is still scheduled. All of it still there in episodes you can rewatch as many times as you need to. There's a theory I've developed over many late-night rewatches, which I'll share and then let go. The one-time characters are the show's conscience. The regular cast are locked in their loop. Bart is 10 forever. Homer makes the same mistakes. Springfield resets after every disaster. But the one-time characters aren't. They have weight and consequence and memory. They don't get to forget, and so they function in the episodes they're in as the part of the show that asks, yes, but what would this mean if it actually meant something? Scorpio asks what it would mean if Homer's boss were actually good. Grimes asks what it would mean if someone actually lived by the rules the show pretends to follow. Bergstrom asks what it would mean if someone actually saw Lisa. Carl asks what it would mean if someone actually helped without asking for anything back. The answer in each case is something. It would mean something. And then the episode ends and the character leaves and Springfield resets and the meaning goes with them. That's why I keep rewatching them. Not for the comedy, though the comedy is extraordinary. For that feeling of something meaning something, even briefly, even in a cartoon, even in the particular physics of Springfield where nothing is supposed to last. Good night.